Good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse, live from the World Economic Forum here in Davos. Now, there's been a collective sigh of relief from many world leaders after President Trump U-turned on his threat to impose tariffs on European countries opposed to his ambitions to take over Greenland. Now, the U.S. president also rode back the rhetoric and said he would not try to take the island by force. Expect reaction on all the big issues from speakers today at Davos, including Elon Musk, who was just added to the schedule. Also coming up, world leaders, including the Argentinian president and the Greek prime minister. Now, the U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, the NASDAQ chief executive, and the head of the IMF all join us. On today's show, we'll also get reaction from the French trade minister. Plus, we'll be speaking with chief executives of Accenture, Darktrace, and Marsh. Look, there's a lot of things going on, so let's go straight to the markets because we've had some pretty big moves over the last couple of days when it came to bond markets. European stocks rebounding again after the U.S. president seemed to abandon his tariff threats against Europe, easing concerns over a renewed trade war. Global semiconductor stocks, for example, on the up. This is after we had comments from the Nvidia chief executive at Davos reinforcing enthusiasm for the AI trade. And then we're just in the broader sense, we're seeing a risk appetite returning to equities. Now, later on, we're also expecting President Trump to speak at a signing ceremony here in Davos for his Board of Peace initiative, which has drawn resistance from fellow G7 leaders. But first, let's focus on Greenland. President Trump says a framework deal has been agreed, and therefore the 10% additional tariffs he threatened on European countries will not be imposed on February 1st. In his special address to delegates here in Davos, the U.S. president has said he would not try to take Greenland by force. Now, news of the agreement followed talks between Donald Trump and the NATO Secretary General here in Davos. Exact details of the deal have not been released, but the U.S. president spoke about it yesterday.
It looks like we have the concept of a deal. It gets everything we wanted, including especially real national security. Well, the deal is going to be put out pretty soon, and we'll see. It's right now a little bit in progress, but pretty far along. It gets us everything we needed to get. It's the ultimate long-term deal, and I think it puts everybody in a really good position, especially as it pertains to security and minerals and everything else.
Well, speaking to our editor-in-chief, John Micklethwait, within the last hour, Mark Rutte, the head of NATO, said he did not discuss Greenland's sovereignty with President Trump.
We didn't discuss at all about that issue, so we discussed how can we protect Greenland, how can we protect the wider Arctic region. And again, I think President Trump was the one who reinvigorated NATO at the summit in The Hague with the famous 5%. I think we can be thankful for the fact that he again has been able to take leadership on this issue. How can we collectively protect the Arctic?
Now, before the seeming climb down from President Trump, the French President Emmanuel Macron also gave one of the strongest pushbacks against the threat of more tariffs from the White House, calling for the EU to respond with its more powerful economic weapon if necessary. Let's discuss all of this with Nicolas Forissier, the French trade minister. Minister, thank you so much for joining us. What a week we've had here in Davos. So President Trump now ruled excessive force, dropped tariff threats, and called for immediate talks. Do you think this is really the beginning of de-escalation?
I hope so, because it's just incredible to imagine that a country member of NATO, founder of NATO, is running against NATO interests and the other countries of NATO. So I think this was perhaps a way to introduce a more resilient, more calm, more solid discussion, and I hope we will have it. This is the French position, at least, asking for, of course, protecting the Arctic, but doing it inside NATO and the alliance, which has been ruling our country and Europe also for years.
So is France and Europe ready to talk to President Trump about what the deal could look like?
I mean, we always are ready to talk, and we also have to know that France, as well as Europe in general, we have efforts to make to build a better, more solid Europe, more united, especially on the economical level. But of course, we're already ready to discuss. It's normal. It's a good way. Our position is to say, and President Macron said it very clearly here in Davos, we cannot accept what would be a rule of force. You know, we need to have normal discussions between great power countries, zones, and try to make as easy as possible the peace and resilient construction, if I may say so.
Minister, I mean, the European Parliament yesterday froze, right, the deal that was agreed between the US and the EU. Is this deal dead? Does it get revived? Like, what happens to trade?
Well, you have surprising decisions or surprising words, and of course we have responses, and it's normal that we use all the tools that are in our hands to just say no. We don't go in this escalation, as you were saying. We just agree to discuss and to try to find fair deals and to build something together rather than to destroy against each other's.
I mean, President Macron talked about using this anti-coercion instrument, right? This is powerful and it's the harshest. Is this the right way to deal with Donald Trump?
I mean, we have these tools in European institutions. We can anti-coercion tools. They exist. Instruments. They exist. If we need to use them, we will use them. They are there in case to be used. Okay, this is the only thing we said. But of course, the idea is not to use them, but just try to discuss and have, again, fair and solid discussions and deals.
But, Minister, is it fair to say that actually in dealing with this president, President Trump, it's just a lot of psychology, right? This is not about instruments that get you. It's not really about balances. It's trying to get a fair negotiating position. So what kind of discussion works with the type of temperament that President Trump has?
Just be solid, just be calm, just be polite, and just say what we think and what we are. Europe is Europe, and we are not going to be weak. We're just trying to be what we are. And we know that also we have some efforts to do in the security defense questions, and Mr. Trump asked Europe to do it, and we are doing it. This is something that should be said. On the economical level, we have for trade to build some diversified and secured deals all over the world to diversify our exports, but also to secure our supply chain, especially in rare earths and critical metals and so on. And we have to build a Europe which is far more united, harmonizing its regulations more than ever, and I think it's the most important, building a strong financial unification so that we are able to invest massively in innovation industry, as was asking Mr. Draghi. And this is the strategy. And Mr. Trump and the Americans, I think they understand that. They are just trying to challenge us.
But, Minister, why is Europe not united in using these anti-coercion instruments? Is there a worry that actually it backfires?
Because we are building this little by little, and some members are not ready to do it and use it. Some others are saying just if these instruments exist, we use them. At least we say we are going to use them if necessary. So this is little by little being built. I mean, look what happened on the questions of security and defense since the beginning of the Ukraine war. It has changed massively. And of course, America wanted European countries to change, but we did it. No. So things are improving. I understand those who are saying that Europe is still very slow, but I really think that it's moving far more faster than you think.
Okay, so Champagne was threatened. Well, it was threatened at some point, right? Champagne, I mean, there were threats of even 200% tariffs.
Yeah. I learned yesterday that it was not 200 but 100, and now today I didn't hear anything about it. So this is not possible. This is not acceptable.
How sensitive are actually French exports of champagne and others to these threats?
Sensitive. They're very sensitive, and of course, the United States is a very important destination for wine and spirits, and especially champagne. This is the reason why, first, it's not acceptable to have this kind of weapon, taking some sectors which are very symbolic, important for us, as hostages. This is not acceptable. And if it was done, there would be some responses. But this is also the reason, and I'm saying this as a foreign trade minister, we have to, again, diversify. And Europe has to go on negotiating, discussing fair trade, win-win partnerships, securing and diversifying our exports, and especially for wine and spirits. And as let's say Mercosur, for example, is very good for wine and spirits sector. It's dangerous for cattle raising and beef, for poultries and so on. And we have to protect those sectors. This is the French position. This is what we did. But it's very good for wine and spirits. So we have to diversify, and this will calm everybody and everything.
And Minister, at the same time, so you're seeing China and China imports actually coming much more to Europe and France. So where's the threat there? Are there any industries that are threatened more than others because of these deflationary imports, actually?
I mean, the question of China is different. And the French position has been very clear also, and I think it's the European position. We cannot accept that China overcapacities are poured on the French and European market. This has to be regulated. And so this is why, for example, and France was very much pushing this, we made rebalance situation on electric vehicles, for example. We need to have a discussion with the Chinese where they understand that finally it would be better for them to invest, produce in Europe, and have a normal and balanced trade with us. And okay, we are ready to work with them. The same, we are asking them, for example, to buy our champagne, our wine and spirits, for example.
Do France and Germany share the same concerns about China?
No, of course, we don't have the same immediate interests. It's the difficulty in Europe that where is the good position between national and normal national interests? And for example, Germany's car industry is very important for them, and I understand that. Where is the good position between the national interest, for example, ours is agriculture, and the European interest, the common building of Europe? And this is very difficult, of course, but little by little I think we are improving. And Mr. Trump and this big tectonic movement, plaque tectonic, movement. We are facing today in the international trade. This is obliging us to react and to change our mind and our the way we're acting.
It certainly focuses the mind. What's the right way of Europe? How quickly does Europe have to get away from China's dependency on rare earths?
As quickly as possible. This is what we are doing. France will chair the J7, for example, this year. Mm-hmm. This will be a subject I will put in the trade committee of J7, because we really have to diversify our supply chain in rare earth and critical metals. We have to invest in industrial sites. I mean, we are doing it in the south of France, for example, for heavy rare earth. We're going to, with the Japanese, it's a joint venture between Japanese and companies and French companies. We are going to produce 15% of the world's needs in
How quickly? Because material,
how quickly? 2 years. It's being performed now. We are building the place. So, I mean, this we have to, again, to diversify, to have partnerships with different countries. And this is, for example, what we're doing in Argentina, between France and Argentina. A lot of things are going on. We have to be very quick because for the moment, we still are dependent from China. That's right.
Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Minister, French Trade Minister there, Nicolas Forissier. Coming up, the Nvidia chief executive gives another boost to the AI trade when speaking at Davos. We'll discuss how this technology is reshaping competitiveness with Julie Sweet, the chief executive of Accenture. That interview is coming up next, and this is Bloomberg.
This week, live from the Alpine Mountains of Switzerland, is the World Economic Forum annual meeting in Davos. Bloomberg Television brings you unmatched coverage and conversations with world leaders, business executives, and billionaires as they navigate responsible AI deployment, economic expansion, and geopolitical tensions. Tune in for daily coverage all week. Context changes everything.
back to the Pulse, everyone. We're live from Davos. Now, Nvidia Chief Executive Jensen Huang is reinforcing investor excitement for the AI trade. While speaking to BlackRock's Larry Fink here in Davos, Huang said the infrastructure around AI will need trillions of dollars in additional investment over the coming years.
This is the largest infrastructure build-out in human history. That's going to create a lot of jobs. And it's wonderful that the jobs are related to tradecraft, and we're going to have plumbers and electricians and construction and steel workers and network technicians and people who install and fit out the equipment, and all of these jobs. We're going to, in the United States, we're seeing quite a significant boom in this area. Salaries have gone up, nearly doubled. Yeah. And so we're talking about six-figure salaries for people who are building chip factories or computer factories.
Jensen Huang there, the Nvidia Chief Executive, speaking to the co-chair of WEF, Larry Fink. Now, companies left, right and center, of course, are racing to adopt AI technologies in an attempt to be more productive and more cost efficient. As part of that drive, consulting firm Accenture says it's training its employees to be AI native. Well, I'm joined by Julie Sweet, the Chief Executive of Accenture. Thank you, as always, for giving us a little bit of your busy schedule, which I imagine this year was even busier than usual. First of all, how do you think, Julie, AI is actually reshaping competitiveness between the U.S., Europe, and Asia?
Well, Francine, thanks for having me. It really starts with how it's reshaping competitiveness in industries, right? So if you're a consumer-facing industry, you have to now be able to, have people buy within models, for example. It's a whole new channel. And so the basis of competition in industry is changing, and the same is therefore true among the countries. If your industries are not at the forefront, you're going to have an issue.
So who's adopting at pace and in the right way, and who's being left behind?
The U.S. companies today, and that's really data, has said that the U.S. has been ahead in the digital race. And because you need a digital foundation, the U.S.-based companies are ahead. But lots of global companies, including in Europe, we have lots of great global European companies who are very fast. It's not so much about is it U.S. or Europe. It comes down to if your data is not in the cloud, if you don't have a digital foundation, it's hard to go fast. And across the world in every geography, there are great companies who have been investing, and those who have not have to catch up there, along with all the other changes that you need to make.
Julie, how much of this is also about data centers? So it's a race to, does it make you more powerful? Does it give you a leg up if a data center is in your country? We're seeing a lot of wrangling on this.
Data centers are absolutely critical because that's the infrastructure of the country. And so that's exploding. In fact, we just bought another company to do data center consulting because of that. And you have to think about it long term. I think the mistake somehow some people are making is this isn't about the data center today. It's about a strategy. And that's what we're seeing countries doing. And we're helping countries do that, particularly as you think about sovereign AI and the need to have the data centers to support that. And I've been spending a lot of time right here in Davos on that topic.
You've also trained, hundreds of thousands of your staff to be AI tool native. What can companies and countries learn from your efforts?
Well, first of all, if leaders don't understand AI, they can't lead the company through the changes. In 3 years, you should be able to say, my company has different services, has different insights. That requires a depth of learning from leaders first, and then you have to bring everybody along the way. So leader-led learning is absolutely critical. It's also critical for regulators. In regulated industries, if regulators block the AI, they're not going to be able to scale and succeed. And so governments, the not-for-profits and companies all need leader-led learning and then a strategy to bring all of our people along.
Can you give a concrete example? When we go around speaking to a lot of chief executives, they understand it, but then it's always a struggle to kind of say, how do I actually put it for my workforce or for my citizens?
Well, one of my clients told me that, that until they had their 300 leaders touch keyboards, see what the AI could do, they couldn't get moving. That's a very tangible example. That's the first thing we did way back after November 2022. The most training was actually our top 50 leaders who actually got their hands dirty, right, understanding it. And that's what we mean by leader-led learning. And once you have that, it unlocks the possibilities of what does it really mean that it's going to change everything?
What's the biggest mistake from customers that you advise of what they're doing with AI, or not doing, actually?
The biggest mistake is thinking it's about AI. AI is a powerful tool. If you don't start with your business strategy and a business outcome, and that's a real problem. We've seen so many projects that are not in the same things that you measure. If it doesn't hit the P&L, it's really, if it's a productivity, then it's not going to have impact. So you have to start with your strategy, not it's an AI project.
What are some of the biggest questions that chief executives are asking you right now about this year, 2026?
Actually, there's been a big shift because we've had a lot of great examples of things scaling. So especially in the marketing space, pharmaceutical companies getting, drugs in the hands of physicians faster because they can bring the marketing material faster is just one example, field sales, et cetera. So now the real shift over the last year is how do we think about this holistically? We're seeing value, real value, but we want to embed it everywhere. And how do you do that? And that comes to the talent. It comes to being willing to operate differently. And very importantly, it comes to a strategy that says, if I don't want to just do what I'm doing today better, I want to have breakthroughs. And those are the conversations that we're having.
Have you heard any regrets of, the way that some of them rolled out AI?
The biggest regret has been too many projects without the discipline of, is it going to be material enough? What is the business outcome? This thread around, it's not, AI is a tool, is what you're starting to hear. Yes, it's a really, really powerful tool. But we've never built businesses, won consumers, reimagined manufacturing just by the tool.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing we're talking a lot about is, how everyone's job will change and training. But what's the right way to support a worker that might be really afraid of AI, that, it material changes the work it does today?
Look, starting in 2019, we've been training all of our workers, whether you're in the mailroom or a strategist, on technology. Technology is a basic skill now. And once you start making that investment, people get less scared about their jobs because they know you're invested in making sure they can do the next jobs. And we have a design choice. We believe you can design to have new entry-level jobs, but coming along with that is you need to be able to educate, and there's also a collaboration that has to happen with schools, with universities, but we're in early innings. We can make that design choice.
So what does that look like?
Well, the first thing it looks like when we're looking at Accenture, we're saying, well, some of our people can do things that maybe they would have done in 2 years. So what does that mean? Well, they don't have 2 years of apprenticeship. So we're giving them communication training so that they can get the soft skills they would have had in that apprenticeship, right? You have to rethink what are the skills that you need, given that you're now able to augment humans so that they can do things earlier. So you have to think holistically, and the soft skills is a big place that people are missing.
Are chief executives thinking enough about those entry-level jobs? Because they're also spending so much money on the AI models and trying to, that some of them say, look, I'm just going to skip hiring the younger folks and spend on AI instead.
Francine, I think this is really important. I haven't met a single CEO that says they want to eliminate entry-level jobs. Their focus is, how do you help us create the new entry-level jobs? Not a single CEO thinks that is what the future should be.
How much distraction is there because of trade and tariffs?
This week has been quite a bit of distraction. I think we're all relieved at what came out yesterday. But at the same time, it's only been a distraction in the big conversation. I have had so many meetings with companies, and that's too bad. But let's make sure that we're winning regardless of the atmosphere. So it's been a distraction more in the media, but I will tell you, and CEOs are saying, we don't have tailwinds in the environment. We have to execute.
Julie, thank you so much, as always, for joining us. Julie Sweet there, the chief executive of Accenture. Coming up, with the number of cyber attacks on the rise, we'll also be joined by the chief executive of Darktrace. This, of course, is Davos 2026, and this is Bloomberg. Welcome back to The Pulse, everyone, live from Davos. Now, geopolitics continues to dominate here. Cybersecurity, a key area of concern for international relations and the corporate world. Now, companies reporting of cybersecurity incidents to European regulators surged last year following a multi-year plateau. The law firm DLA Piper says the average number of data breaches reported to EU authorities rose by 22% last year. Well, with me now is Jill Popelka, the chief executive of Darktrace. Thank you for joining us. I mean, you're like the beacon of who we turn to understand exactly some of the cybersecurity threats. What's the landscape looking like today? Terrifying?
Oh, Francine, I'm not as terrified. Actually, this week has been very encouraging. We've had great leaders, not only from the cybersecurity space, but also from AI companies. And we're all talking about how to ensure that we have a secure future. How do we ensure that even as we are starting to proliferate these AI agents, and there's so many unknowns, that we can also get visibility and control and put some guardrails around those so that people are safe and innovating.
But so how is Darktrace adapting to stay ahead of, some of these really personalized attacks, deep fakes, and also automated hacks?
Well, Francine, the great thing about Darktrace is that we started in 2013 with an incredible concept around this technology, which is if we understand what's normal within a business, we can protect it from what's not normal. And that's what Jack and the team in Cambridge are working on today. We continue to grow this R&D team, and they not only now protect networks, they protect email, cloud, OT, but we're also securing AI so that people truly can get visibility into their agents.
Can you give us an idea of how the threat is changing? It is more complicated, right?
It is. The threats are becoming more sophisticated. They're becoming more complex. And whereas before we might have thought about being attacker-centric and trying to predict what the attacker was going to do next, that's not what Darktrace has ever done, and it's definitely not what we can do moving forward. Because we can't predict this high-velocity, high-threat landscape. We know that countries like Japan, for example, they used to have a natural barrier because their language was more complex and people couldn't quite get their, the cyber attackers couldn't get their heads around creating an attack in Japanese. But now AI can create those complex, highly sophisticated threats in any language around the world. And so, we're looking at a much higher velocity threat landscape.
So is AI and cybersecurity much more sophisticated than even 12 months ago?
Oh, of course. It's becoming more and more sophisticated. We have the most amazing minds in Cambridge, people who are linguistics majors, people who have majored in the classics, but now looking at how is this AI challenge for us? How do we protect the world against it?
So after Darktrace's acquisition by Thomson Bravo and the shift to operating privately, how has that changed your focus and investment strategy?
Darktrace was already changing, and so the transition into private equity ownership really wasn't that big a deal for us. We were continuing on our path of innovating and creating the latest and greatest products. We were also working on scaling our business. So we had become really a $700 million startup, and then we needed to ensure that our systems and our processes and our talent acquisition and all the different things that big companies do, that we were doing those really well also. I wanted to make sure, though, that as we applied process and as we created these foundational systems, we didn't take away the spirit of Darktrace, because that innovation is what keeps us ahead.
That's difficult, right? It goes to kind of the culture of the company, and it's difficult to put your finger on it, but if it works, it works.
That's right, and it so works at Darktrace.
Jill, talk to me a little bit about the debt load.
So, interesting topic, right? The debt load is something that we see as part of this program that we're running, right? I'm really focused day to day on executing, on operating the business. And so I'm not thinking about the debt load quite as much. Our partners at Thomson Bravo are thinking about that all the time and ensuring that we're in a healthy place, that we're in a healthy spot going forward. And as we continue to grow our revenue, we feel like we're in a great place.
So when you look at, again, cybersecurity kind of like ecosystem, when you look at partners, do you see others as like rivals or partners, or how does this landscape change as people are spending more and more money on cybersecurity and cyber threats?
Yeah, two different parts of that. First of all, customers are always working with partners. And so we are going completely partner focused, ensuring that we are working with our partners to educate customers not only on the threats, but on which tools can be best to protect them from those threats. What's really been encouraging this week at Davos is that I've been talking to who you might think of as Darktrace's competitors, the CEOs of other cybersecurity companies. We meet in forums that allow us to really talk about how to solve this problem for the world. And I've been so encouraged because we work together. We talk about how our solutions are complementary, how we work together to protect the most important part of what humans are doing.
I think some of the most important and interesting sessions are also with some of the spy chiefs. Again, it's a world that not many people know about, except through movies. Are the cyber threats coming from government agents or government entities, or what can you tell us about where the biggest threat is coming from?
What's interesting is AI has democratized cyber attacks, just like it's democratized so many other things.
That's a good line.
It doesn't really matter where it's coming from. From a Darktrace perspective, we're going to protect you from a nation-state actor, just like we're going to protect you from a Western teenager in his garage, having a heyday with AI that day. So it's not so much about being attacker-centric. What we do want to think about, though, is how we get every anomaly and how we ensure that we're protecting from those.
How are you using AI to actually see the anomalies?
We're using a multi-layered AI approach out in Cambridge. We have, again, some incredible minds that are working on how you use multi-layers of AI to really understand not just what's normal for your business, but also which of those things that are not normal are truly threats. So we can prioritize those and ensure that the SOC, the Security Operations Center at a company, can look at the most important things first.
Jill, so sometimes I get told that actually the most simple phishing, right, done cleverly, is the most dangerous.
It's true.
In cybersecurity.
It's true. Phishing and with deepfakes, today, actually this week, I've had an interesting conversation with CEOs around deepfakes. Apparently, all CEOs have experienced them. We don't talk about them very much. We're in safe forums, honestly, here. And so when you talk about a deep fake, I actually experienced one walking out of my first board meeting. And when I walked out, and the executives that I'd really just started to lead had a blank stare on their face. I asked what was wrong, and they said, "We've just gotten a voicemail from you." And it was asking for financial data and customer data. "Was that you?" I said, "No, I was in the board meeting." They said, "Of course." And so these were, astute executives. As I told that story, more and more CEOs said, "That happened to me early in my tenure as well." Clearly, it's a tactic that attackers are using to hit CEOs early in their tenure when they haven't established communication channels and haven't established the security proceedings that they normally would have.
And I've heard also, deep fake, of people wanting to put out, even countries or governments wanting to put out an endorsement or not, and their team actually back home saying, "Hold on, this is a deep fake." How sophisticated? Is there a point where we won't be able to tell deep fake from the truth?
Oh, I think we're already at that point. I think we're already at the point where deep fakes can be so good that it's very difficult to tell, especially if, you're a new employee at a company and you haven't heard often. And so it's a multi-layered cybersecurity approach, and humans are truly the most important line of defense.
Jill, thank you so much for your time. Jill Popelka, they're the chief executive of Darktrace. Now, the former UK Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, says trust has been lost between the EU and the United States following the row over Greenland. The President Trump has withdrawn his threat of further tariffs on Europe after reaching what he called a framework deal on Greenland's future. Rishi Sunak, who's now a senior advisor to Goldman Sachs, told me EU-US relations have been damaged by this week's events.
It was welcome that we seem to have reached an agreement, or that we appear to have reached an agreement on Greenland yesterday, and Mark is to be commended for some skillful diplomacy. But obviously the process of getting to that agreement has clearly damaged trust amongst allies, long-standing allies with deep friendship and partnership. That's been the very unsettling thing about the last few days.
Is Prime Minister Starmer doing it the right way? We keep on hearing from people that maybe are closer to Donald Trump that if you show a bit of teeth, he backs away quicker.
We in the UK, of course, the United States is our closest and oldest ally in that regard, and I think it is important to make sure that we remain aligned with the US where we can. But this was something which clearly was unacceptable, and the Prime Minister was right to say that it was unacceptable and be firm on that. And I think that the diplomacy over the last few days has, it appears, led us to a better place than we were a few days ago. But you're also not wrong. It is important when lines are crossed that countries are able to demonstrate that strength, that they will stand up for what they believe in, stand up for their values and their interests. And the world we're in, this new world order, requires a bit more hard power. Whether we like it or not, there's no point moaning about it. We have to adjust to that, and we have to have that hard power, invest in it, and then be prepared to use it to protect our values and our interests.
Do you think European leaders and business feel pushed around? And does it mean that actually the nature of the relationship just has changed forever?
I think trust is an incredibly important commodity when it comes to geopolitics and relationships, and it's something that is built up over time. And the damage that we've seen to trust in the last few days is obviously very sad for someone who believes strongly in the transatlantic alliance. And the frustrating thing is, my colleagues in Europe have been engaging with the US, who were right to focus on Arctic security. Of course, that's an increasing concern that we all should be investing more in and paying more attention to. and the Europeans and the Danes were very open to the types of arrangements that we're now, that seem to be part of the deal. We could have got to that place without all of the drama of the last few days and the damage to trust that it's done, and people then feeling that they have been pushed around and bullied, which is obviously very damaging for long-term relations.
That was Rishi Sunak, the former UK Prime Minister, speaking to me a little bit earlier. Now, coming up, we discuss the escalating political tension and what it means for risk and insurance with John Doyle, the Chief Executive of Marsh. That's next, and this is Bloomberg. Welcome back to The Pulse, everyone. I'm Francine Lacqua, and we're live from Davos. Now, the Trump administration has created a tense atmosphere here in Davos, even with the president saying that he would refrain from imposing tariffs on goods from European nations over the Greenland issue. Now, let's discuss these escalating tensions and actually what it means for risk and insurance products with John Doyle, the Chief Executive of Marsh. John, as always, thank you so much for joining us. I mean, we certainly started the year with a bang. There's Venezuela, concerns over Iran, and everything to do with Greenland. Does it change the type of products that people want in insurance?
Well, I think what needs to change is the mindset of business leaders all over the world. It's a heightened period of risk, uncertainty. You mentioned some geopolitical events, but broadly speaking, it's geoeconomic confrontation. We're watching that unfold here. You mentioned the tension and anxiety here in Davos over the course of the last several days, and so it requires a different way of thinking. Financing those risks at the end of the day is at the end of that thought process, and so we're working, though, very, very closely across all of our capability set to help businesses and try to invest with a level of confidence in this environment.
But, I mean, given there are more heightened, I guess, domestic tensions in the U.S., are there more insurance products to go with it? Or?
Well, we have products and capabilities and advisory work that we can help around civil commotion, social unrest, those kinds of products. And, of course, they're under greater demand at the moment. But again, it is, while it's an extraordinary moment in many, many ways, there are real opportunities for businesses too. And so, I expected this week it to be broadly a discussion about geopolitics and AI, and that's really, what I've experienced at least.
I mean, on geopolitics and AI, and you do have a very large company with very almost different units. How does that change the caliber of what you want to invest in?
Yeah, I mean, for us, some of this risk and uncertainty is a real opportunity for our business in trying to help businesses thrive through all of this extraordinary environment. And so it's an opportunity for bringing our capabilities together. We've got big assets and capabilities in risk, but also in strategy. And so it's risk and opportunity. And I think AI is a great example of big risk and opportunity. I know you were talking about cyber risk earlier today. Heightened cyber risk from AI, I don't think gets quite enough attention. But of course, there's job dislocation, economic disruption, business model disruption that comes with AI. But at the same time, extraordinary opportunities to reinvent the way you do work. And I'm excited about that for our company, but also we're helping companies think through how to deploy these technologies in their workplaces.
So how do you use AI? I mean, is it used differently in terms of modeling or communication with employees? And I imagine, again, it's different for every unit.
We've probably made more progress in our company with productivity tools, but we're also putting an AI lens on all the analytics. So all the different models that we've developed, many of them around risk or in investments, but putting an AI lens on that, given our scale, gives us a great opportunity to serve our clients better. And a big part of my focus this year will be how can we drive more revenue growth from AI-generated models.
How does what happened in Venezuela impact some of the insurance products that you offer in that space?
Well, I would say we have 100 people in Caracas, so. When those events unfolded, very early in the year, wanted to make sure our people were safe. Mm-hmm. But I think, an example of the way business leaders need to think, you need to immediately look at your assets around the Caribbean, around Latin America, and see whether or not there's broader contagion or risks like that. And so for us, we did scenario planning, and we did a lot of work for our clients in the same way.
What about Greenland? Have more mining companies reached out to assess whether, they can be protected more or looking at risk differently?
I think Greenland is, and as it relates to rare earths and minerals, an example of maybe an extreme example, but of some of the conversations that have been happening more over the course of the last couple of years all over the world. And so I think many of those businesses, have developed a framework to think about some of the opportunities and challenges in this geopolitical environment. But again, it's working with our clients, trying to find ways to invest with a level of confidence.
So I'm sure how many clients have you met in Davos?
Oh, dozens.
And what are they asking you?
Yeah, they're asking us for help. How do we navigate this risk? What kind of risk framework can we put in place? How can we be more agile? And really, I've heard from a lot of world leaders as well during the course of the week, and you're seeing some parallels where diversification is a major theme. But also, again, scenario planning, doing more tabletop exercises. We have an excellent risk framework within inside of our company, and we provide a lot of advice to other businesses that way. But making sure you're aware of supply chain risks, broader geopolitical risk, and how that may impact your business is really important.
Are you expecting more shocks? I mean, risk has changed, right? If you'd asked me like January 1st, or we spoke to loads of economists and said, the risk of tariffs is behind us. And then it wasn't at all.
Right. I will say, a lot has happened in the last year, for sure. And, again, geoeconomic confrontation being this kind of, to me, top risk and heightened risk that business and world leaders are confronting at the same time. But I will say, and I think the last couple of weeks are a good example, markets are, I think on a relative basis, have been calm and really kind of trying to think through, okay, where does this all head? So I think we all recognize, certainly the U.S. administration's operating with a different playbook. That's going to create some disruption in the short term, maybe medium or long term, but being patient and being thoughtful about managing through that. And I'm seeing businesses begin to understand the environment better and making decisions and investing through it.
John, thank you so much for joining us. John Doyle there, the Chief Executive of Marsh. Now, within the last hour, the NATO Secretary General also told us that he did not discuss the future sovereignty of Greenland when he met President Trump. The U.S. President says a framework deal for Greenland's future has been agreed. He spoke to our editor-in-chief, John Micklethwait. Mark Rutte, the head of NATO, revealed what happened when the two men met.
President Trump has been clear from when he was in office, Trump 45, also when he came back into office, Trump 47, that when it comes to the protection of the Arctic, with a priority on Greenland, we have to spend more energy, more time, more focus on this, because we know the sea lanes are opening up. The Chinese and the Russians are more and more active. So what we discussed last night, how in a practical sense we can get this done, and we agreed on these two tracks. One is the 7 countries in the High North, including the United States, working together to protect against any adversary. So that will be something where NATO is heavily involved. And then when it comes to Greenland specifically, continuing the discussions they started last week. The Danish delegation, Secretary Rubio, Vice President Vance in Washington, to continue that discussion. Also to make sure that when it comes to Greenland specifically, their economy, their military situation, Russia and China will never get access.
And the Danes and sovereignty, is that all assured?
We didn't discuss at all about that issue, so we discussed how can we protect Greenland, how can we protect the wider Arctic region. And again, I think President Trump was the one who reinvigorated NATO at the summit in The Hague with the famous 5%. I think we can be thankful for the fact that he again has been able to take leadership on this issue. How can we collectively protect the Arctic?
The latest rumours out there that it would be involve sort of bigger bases, longer leases, but not actually changing sovereignty, and the idea of far more American troops. Is that the sort of basis of it?
We didn't go into those details at all. We know that the Danes are completely open to having more American presence in Greenland, and Greenland is open to that. And I think it is good that these discussions take place with the 3 of them, because at the end I cannot negotiate on behalf of anyone. I was listening to a lot of people. I think there is a landing ground here, but in the end, of course, now we have to make it happen.
Well, that was the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte speaking to our editor-in-chief, John Micklethwait. Now, the U.S. president due to take part in the Board of Peace signing ceremony here in Davos. With us now is Bloomberg's Jumana Versace, of course, who covers the Middle East. Jumana, this is, I mean, there were so many questions about whether leaders would show up, but not show up. Just explain to us what exactly this board is.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a very good question, Fran, because I think there are a lot of people asking exactly what the board is going to entail. Essentially, it's an oversight committee. This is phase 2 of the bigger plan for Gaza that they agreed a couple of months ago. Phase 1 obviously was about the cessation of hostilities, the return of hostages in exchange for prisoners. Now the idea is to move on to phase 2. Now only one element of it is this so-called Board of Peace. And there's been a lot of controversy around it, Francine.
Yeah, I'll say.
There has been a lot of controversy, but for many reasons. One of them is because the charter that was released, and many reporters have been really focused on this point, doesn't actually include a reference to Gaza. Their ambitions seem to be broader than just the oversight of what is happening in Gaza, and perhaps be a competing mechanism to the United Nations. So many countries are taking umbrage to that.
I mean, President Putin was invited to join this. That was controversial. And President Trump was asking for money, a lot of money to join the board.
Yes, so those are a couple of other elements that were leaked. Actually, yesterday, President Trump confirmed that Putin has accepted the invitation. On the sum of money, $1 billion apparently is the number that's being floated around in order for these members on the Board of Peace to maintain a permanent position, because initially they sign up for a 3-year role, and if they want to extend it, make it permanent, they'd have to cough up the money, which is sort of a pay-to-play mechanism. Unclear if anyone is really going to be willing to cough up the money. And then the other thing that people are really questioning is the fact that Trump himself is the ultimate chair, so he has ultimate oversight authority over this board. And even when he's no longer acting U.S. president, there's nothing in the charter to suggest that he will no longer be in that role. So I think a lot of the Europeans are questioning that, and they've not really jumped in to signing onto it. Middle East countries have.
Yeah, so it's our understanding, actually, no G7 leader, apart from the U.S., right, has signed up to this,
so
but
far.
you have 20 heads of states.
Yes, so far. And what you are hearing is the likes of Maloney, for example, yesterday saying it's not totally out of the question, but there needs to be some discussion about certain elements of what exactly the mandate of this Board of Peace is going to entail. But the signing ceremony is going to happen shortly, and we are waiting for President Trump to arrive right here to the Congress Center. Again, people are lining up, similarly how they did yesterday, to see who exactly is going to be signing on to this. Apparently, 50 invitations have been sent out to heads of state. From what we understand, about 20 of them have accepted and are going to be present. Not necessarily the heads of state themselves, but representatives from those countries.
And they're paying?
At this point, no, because the first 3 years are free, I guess.
Okay.
But actually, it's interesting on that point, Francine. In the last 24 hours, I think the U.S. administration is trying to distance themselves from, one, that fee, and two, the fact that this Board of Peace is going to be competing with the United Nations and really refocus the mandate on Gaza specifically.
I mean, what does it mean for Gaza? It doesn't seem actually to be very hopeful for the population there.
So it's an interesting structure, because the way ultimately it's going to work is an oversight body. They're not going to deal with the day-to-day. This is not about governance. It's just simply an international oversight body. A Bulgarian diplomat was appointed as the representative to the Board of Peace, and he will be overseeing a transitional technocratic governance committee that is put together, composed of Palestinians, all with technocrat backgrounds. And those are the people that should be, in theory, tasked with the day-to-day administration, with the oversight of the board, and that representative as well. Again, details still thin, but at this point, what people will say, especially some of the leaders in the region, that we are seeing for the first time an internationalization of this conflict. There is international attention, there's buy-in from many of these leaders into what happens. And interestingly enough, despite a lot of criticism at the beginning, the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu also has accepted to be part of the board.
Yeah, which must be controversial.
Well, in itself, I mean, there's a lot of controversy, but it's important to have, obviously, buy-in from Israel, too. I mean, they are important. They are an integral part of this process if you want to think about stability in the region.
Joanna, I mean, yesterday I was in the room When President Trump spoke, he took a long time to speak about other things. Are we expecting the same today? We're expecting some kind of press conference.
Yes, so there should be.
He could be derailed. He could talk about Greenland and other things as well.
That's correct. I mean, you never know with these. And it's interesting, yesterday during his speech, he actually didn't mention the Middle East that much, just a passing reference. I think he was asked about Hamas in the Q&A, and he said, absolutely, this phase, the disarmament has to happen. Obviously, that is one of the key pillars of phase 2. But the focus now will be on this major milestone, building on the success from Sharm el-Sheikh. This is the signing ceremony. It's obviously very symbolic. He will be speaking about that. And then from what we understand, he will have senior members of the administration with him, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Jared Kushner should be there as well, Steve Witkoff, all of the big players who helped get this across the line, in addition to the Bulgarian High Representative to the board that I just mentioned to you too, and perhaps he'll give some remarks as well.
I mean, is this a flattery project for President Trump? Is this how it's being discussed? I imagine that if you're a high representative or a country right now, you're thinking, would we flatter to hope to get something from this, or do you actually believe in the process?
I think this is the pathway. People see it as a pathway, not necessarily a flattery, a moment of flattery. I think, if you look at this conflict has been raging for decades now. And I think people really do feel that perhaps this is the first time that, again, you have the internationalization of the conflict and you have the international community focused on really bringing about long-term stability. And so I think there are a lot of reservations about the structure, the oversight, the questions that we brought up vis-a-vis, inviting people like Putin onto the board. But ultimately, this is the pathway in the right direction, and people want it to succeed. The question is obviously execution and whether this technocratic committee on the ground can actually deliver and do it in a way that is acceptable to all parties involved, and of course to the Palestinians and to Israel as well, to bring about long-term security.
Jumana, thank you so much. Jumana Barsachi there with the very latest, of course. We're waiting for the president to show up at the Congress, and coming up tomorrow, we'll also be speaking with the South African finance minister. Up next, it's Bloomberg Brief, and this is Bloomberg.